More on the UN climate change meeting. I'm joined by Paul Bledsoe, who's at the conference in Lima. He's a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund Climate Change and Energy Program. Welcome back to the show. One of the key elements at this conference is whether to promote developing countries through reward or punishment systems. Which one is more effective in your mind?
Well, we have to do both. We have to allow the developing world to grow on a low emissions pathway. At the same time, we provide them funding to deal with what are inevitably going to be expensive and difficult climate change impacts, especially for the poorest countries.
Well, we did discuss some of that during your last visit. We discussed the developing countries, how developing countries feel that they shouldn't be held to the same standard as the larger ones. So what do you think is their role at this conference?
Well, the Chinese announcement was very important because it exposed the next level down of major developing nations, including nations like India, Brazil, Indonesia, and many others who need to begin reducing their own emissions. But we still haven't even heard from a bunch of Western countries like South Africa, Canada, Australia, Russia, and others who are fairly rich countries who need to step up, make emissions pledges, fund the Green Climate Fund to help developing countries, and in general become good climate nations rather than laggards, which is what they are right now.
Going back to the U.S. and China, how do they cut their dependency on oil and turn to greener systems? Do you think they're heading in that direction already?
I think the U.S. economy is trending toward ever lower emissions. The price of renewable energy is nearly on par in many places with fossil fuel energy. Technology is being deployed to increase efficiency. So the U.S. economy is becoming a lower carbon economy. Now we need to help major developing countries like China grow in a low emissions manner and skip the heavily polluting steps that the West took. It's a really big challenge, but we have to do it if we're going to bend the global emissions curve down and really get a handle on this problem.
I know we're still a few days away, but in your mind, what will the final draft at the end of this Lima conference look like?
We have to have a draft that has the platform on major issues like climate finance, the monitoring and verification of pledges, the comparability of pledges. We have to have that basic text in place before the end of these talks if we're going to have a really strong platform for an agreement in Paris. I do believe that's possible, but we need to keep pressure on all negotiators instead of simply taking extreme negotiating positions and then compromising at the last minute, to come to the table in good faith and really negotiate an agreement that they can all be proud of.
And Paul, now that you're down there in Lima, anything so far is stuck out in your mind, or what are you looking forward to the most?
Well, I think that the developing world is where the action is going to be on climate change. Their emissions are going to be an ever greater part of global emissions, but they are also going to be on the front lines of climate change impacts. And I believe that the rich Western nations have got to reach out to developing countries and work with them to create this new global low emissions economy. I think it can be done, but we have to recognize that all nations have to play a part. It can't simply be the United States and even China and the European Union. All nations have a role to play. It's going to take everybody's hands on deck to address this issue.
All right, Paul Bledsoe, thanks again so much for joining us from Lima.